In a land where silence often overshadows truth, poetry arises not as entertainment but as resistance. In the Gambia, verses become voices, echoing through classrooms, college halls, and across the crashing waves of the Atlantic. From street corners to library archives, poets are not just wordsmiths, they are truth tellers, educators, and cultural warriors. Their pens echo untold stories of injustice, of hope, of identity. Through rhymes and rhythms, they awaken minds, challenging the systems, preserving heritage, and planting seeds of awareness in the hearts of a generation. To understand poetry's power, we begin with this role of poet. What purpose does poets serve in society?
I can say number one, it's advocacy. As poets, we sometimes advocate for injustice, corruption, and inequality that is happening in the society. It raises awareness in the society because through your poetry work, you can discuss about things that are affecting the society or even the country at large.
While voices differ in size and delivery, the mission often remains the same: to speak truth, speak thought, and stir emotion.
The role of poets are hugely important. You see, for me, I see poetry as something that is divine, something that is divine. Poets are the mouthpiece of the unheard voices. So the poets, they serve as advocates. What others cannot say or what others find it difficult to say, this is what poets say. So their role are hugely important. They can serve as advocates, as I said. They can serve as activists. They can serve as the voices of the voiceless, as we normally say. So their roles are cut across it, because when a poet speaks, it resonates to a lot of people, because most of the time the speaker talks about things that affects him and his society. And those voices, when they are raised, so many people will be able to resonate with those concerns that are raised by poets. So to answer your question, I think the role of poets are hugely important. And as I said, they can be activists, they can be the voices of those that cannot be heard, and the list goes on. So for me, I think they are the mouthpiece of the society, precisely, for the right reasons, most of the time.
From ancient griots to modern-day wordsmiths, poetry has left footprints on the sands of revolution, resistance, and reform.
Poetry has changed the world from different dimensions. You know, if you look at poetry, it ranges from different things, like there are generations, there are eras that have passed. When we look at the roles of poet, or let's just say how poetry changed societies, we are going to start with the Gambia first. I am going to use our own learned Larry Peters, may he so rest in peace. We consider him as a trailblazer in Gambian literature. He wrote one of the poems that is entitled Defense, and in that poem we see Larry Peters talking about moral indecision, like the speaker or the poet is struggling to make a decision between two forces, that is good versus evil, and in that there is that dilemma. So the poet decides not to join with those that are doing good as well as those that are doing bad, because he said if he joins those that are doing good, he is not encouraged to maintain that trend, and he doesn't want to join those that are doing evil. So in that poem, we can see the repeater trying to depict what we call, the decay of corrupt leadership in Africa. And we can also see what I call moral indecision. He has to make a choice because he hasn't made any choice. So Len Repeater's poem, at some point or to some extent, has an influence in the Gambia that we have right now, because we're talking about leadership. All right. Now you move on to other poets. Let's leave the boundaries of the Gambia and we look maybe Africa. And I'm going to start with a poet called Omar Farouk Cisse. Omar Farouk Cisse wrote the Song of the Women of My Land. And in that poem, we see Farouk Cisse talking about tradition, the need to maintain tradition. In what way? These were women that cherish music, they cherish a song, and that song consoles them. So in that poem, there is a line where he says, okay, in those days, a song befall their souls. Talking about how endearing that song was to those people. That is, his people, that is the song of the women of my land in Sierra Leone. Okay? And he moves on further where he said, with a song, they sponge of their anguish to behold their collective pain. So how do we see that poem? We are seeing a poem talking about the need not to allow the tradition to fade away. That's why in his first line he was talking about like a sculpture chipping away at bits of wood. Alright? So we are seeing poetry being used as a tool for people to maintain their identity, not to allow, maybe Western influence or others to disregard their own identity. Now we look at another poet. It's an Angolan poet. We call it Agostinho Neto. He wrote what we call the grief lands of Africa. And in his first two lines, he says, the grief lands of Africa, in the tearful woes of ancient and modern slave. There, Neto is trying to depict how, let's just say, Africans were considered as merchandise, meaning we were usable, should I say, exportable, and at the same time, so many things happen to Africans. All right, so Neto is trying to depict the slave trade that happened here. So there is that sort of protest, a bit of protest, and also a recollection about the past, the bitter past that we had. All right, now you look at also another poet called Nightfall in Soweto by Oswald Misali. He was a South African poet. And what do we see there? That poem also talks about the racism, the apartheid system in South Africa in those days. In those days, black South Africans were not allowed to vote in your own land. A foreigner will come and occupy your land, and you are denied of your voting right. That franchise was limited to those black South Africans. Now, the likes of Oswald Misali, what he did was to write a poem to protest against that one. That's why the poem is entitled Nightfall in Soweto. In two lines, some of the full stanzas where he says, nightfall comes like a dreaded disease, seeping through the pores of a healthy body and ravaging it beyond repair. A murderous hand locking in the saddle, clasping the dagger, strikes down the helpless victim. So we can see that Oswald Misali talking about how South Africans were treated whenever night falls. You see, there is an irony in that poem too, because we don't expect when night falls for people to be terrorized. But in the case of Oswald Misali's poem, we are seeing the black South African being terrorized. Now he uses his poem to protest against the way they were treated. And of course now we have black South Africans as president. Alright? So we can see the need for voices to be spoken, for them to be heard, for society to change for the better. And that's not the only thing. You move on again. Alright? You look at, anyway, my favorite poet called Nii Usundare. It's a Nigerian poet. Me wrote Not My Business. In fact, it's one of the selected poems for the current YSC. It's one of the poems that is being read by the current grade 10s and 11s. So in that poem, it is titled, let's just say, Not My Business. And what me did there is all about, because the first time that it was just said, first they beat up Akani. Okay? When they beat up Akani soft like clay. Now what did you say? He said what? Okay? What is it? My business. Or what is there? My business. So long they don't take the yam from my mouth. Meaning, somebody was maltreated, you kept quiet because you are not affected. Second, they came for the land. Okay? And you continue to say, what is there? That is my business. Or you said, what is there? That is my business. So long they don't take the yam from my mouth. Meaning, they came again, attacked another person, but since you are not affected, you decide to keep quiet. And finally, the third day, okay, the third one, they came for Chile again. Still now, you kept quiet, you keep saying, okay, what is there? That is your business. And so long they don't take that yam from your sovereign mouth. Now what happened there is one very day, because you've been keeping quiet, people have been treated unjustly, you decide to keep quiet. Now when it was your turn, nobody was there to rescue you. Nobody was there to protest against your maltreatment.
And even when humor meets truth, even laughter can provoke thoughts.
Dear youth, it is time for a wake-up call. It is time for a change. The battles that you have fought and the struggles that you have been through, the pain that you have endured when life challenges it seems hard to bear. No mountain is too high and no dream too vast. With determination you will overcome the past. Restrain your power. Let your spirit fly high. Know the strength that resides in you. Soar high as an eagle. Dear youth, I do not know how you survive with so much stress in your life. But all I know, you are Gambians. You suffer and smile. You place your hopes on dubious politicians. Something in my heart is suffocating. I want you to break that silence. Speak out against the wrong. Speak out and ask this question. Do they seek your trust or control? Do they protect your rights or tighten their hold? Do they really serve you? Or is it all just for their gain? You vote, but your voice they don't listen. Your needs and desires they give you their back. Do they really care about you? So dear youth, I said break the silence and cut them off. Dear youth, do not lose hope, neither to give up. After every hour of darkness in life, you need hope to survive. Don't lose your confidence in any case. Have the will to run the race. Be hopeful. Sometimes you scream until the pain is gone. Just take the negativity of the self. Focus in your direction. Pay no attention to all the toxic thoughts. Cherish every moment of your life, and then you will grow. Embrace the challenges with praise and grace. Rise with determination and embrace yourself. Dear youth, I am sorry if my words hurt. I believe we are all patriots to our beloved country, and together we can make a positive change.
Through every bit and pause, he carries a message, woven not just in rhyme, but in purpose.
I feel thirsty with education, but I do not regret with education. I face predicaments in education, yet I can't cringe in education. Educators indeed are men of ages. For them saying that negative no is better than betrayal. Education does not lie for trial. He said he would choose silence over vent of withdrawal. Education means positive attitude and manners. To know yourself and to know every bit about yourself.
Beyond the lines of rhymes, poetry becomes therapy, a mirror reflecting our shared human experience.
If you look at our holy scriptures, they are written in poetic language. You look at the Bible, it's written in poetic language. You look at the Quran, it is written in poetic language. And I keep saying this, the best form of literature can only be found in our religious books. All these styles, literary techniques that writers use to express themselves or whatever, if you read the Quran, you see them, so as the Bible. So clearly, poetry helps people in different ways. Number one, when it comes to the moral aspect of it, in poetry we have different styles. The moral aspect of poetry, we call it didactic poems. We call those poems as didactic poems. And those poems, they preach moral lessons. They talk about the ills, not to follow the ills or the evil aspect of the society, but to follow the good aspect of the society. We can use poems as music. Poetry can be lyrical. All the music that you hear from this music, they can be called poems. And that category of poem, we consider them as what? Lyrical poems. Okay? Because in those poems, there will be what we call rhyming in your verses. There will be refrain, and the list goes on. What we call anaphora. Alright? So that is also something that we can see in our literary work. Now, when you look at poetry, as I said, first and foremost, when a human being, most of our problem is all about morality. I mentioned it in my own book when I said most of us in Gambia, our problem is morality. Yes, the only problem that I see in this country is all about morality, because we know what is wrong, but we don't want to do the right. And sometimes when we are about to be guided, we feel offended. Alright? So the same thing, and poetry, most of these poems, they talk about injustice. And by talking about it, at some point, it makes that injustice to be stopped. Even though it cannot be stopped, it will be minimized. Okay? We've seen writers, all forms of writers. In fact, if you look at literature, the three genres, poetry is considered the oldest genre, because it is where everything, prose, before prose there was poetry, before drama there was poetry. So how poems help people? As I said, it can even stop at unemployment nowadays. People are using spoken word poems to get money. They can use the medium or the media to get money, what we call passive income. You can use your phone, go to website. There are websites that even pay people, those who pay, like those who write. If you write a poem and if your work is published, they pay you with some handsome money. So we've seen all these things happening. All right. So poetry can even help us when it comes to the financial burden that we have. So all these are advantages that we can have in exploring this genre.
In classrooms, cafes, and quiet corners, poetry finds its way into hearts. When words are sharpened into verses, they pierce injustice, they demand answers, they provoke change.
And the most important aspect is the critical thinking. Most of these poets are critical thinkers. They see the world in a way that many people don't see. That's why we have metaphysical poets, the likes of John Donne and others. Their ideas are very complex. Sometimes you consider them as fools and foolish. But the message, if you can only critically analyze what they have, that's the time you see what they're trying to drive at.
Education isn't just found in books. It is in expressions. It is in life stories, shared in stanzas.
Education depends on how you define it. Because even though before formal education was introduced, some people were already educated, whether informally or so, by their parents or so. So precisely, and that education started storytelling. In fact, poetry derives from this storytelling. Before writing begins, it was storytelling. And in those storytelling, there were poetic lines. Sometimes, even using riddles, we can see poetic lines employed in those things. So to answer your question, I would say yes, to some extent, you need education. Because when you are writing poetry, or when you are doing poetry or writing poems, you are observing, you are writing it in English or any other language, and you have to observe the laws of the language. I do know we have what we call poetic license as a poet. Like sometimes you can choose not to follow convention Just subject-verb agreement. You can choose to violate the rules, but you must have a reason. Most of the time, you should have a reason. Adversely, or most often, we are advised to make sure we follow the convention. But in some instance, in your write-up, you can choose not to follow convention. You can even misspell a word, but make sure you have a reason for doing that one. So precisely, to answer your question, you need education to become a very good poet, but it's not a necessity. You can become a good poet because poetry is vast. We have spoken word poets, we call them spoken word artists. We have written ones as well. There are some people, they can speak but they cannot write. Others, they can write, they cannot speak as they wish. Others, God give them a talent to have that ability, that oratory ability, as well as the writing skills. So as I said, to answer your question, yes, I think it is advised to have education to become a better poet. The door of education is learn. I say learn, the son of the doors, learn. So that the cord of slavery shall be cut from your neck. So you remain equal to your world, neck and neck. Learn Arabic to understand your religion. Learn Western education to understand your world as well as your religion. Learn your native language to understand yourself. Because the unlettered psyllium is always pulled by the letter. This should be enough as a reminder, Peter.
Behind every powerful poem lies a powerful story. What fuels the fire of the poet?
I get my inspiration from various aspects. But most of the time I get my inspiration from personal feelings. Sometimes, if I have stress, I have grief, or looking at the people around me, you understand, or sometimes even through nature, I get my inspiration from various parts.
I have a lot of inspiration, but honestly, I think the reason why I even ventured into this writing or literary stuff, there was one very day I was reading a poem written by a Christian English poet called John Milton. And John Milton wrote a sonnet, we call it Miltonic sonnet, and I think sonnet 18. Sonnet 18 is the sonnet, and the title is On His Blindness. Okay, others will call it When I Consider How My Life is Spent. So in that poem, John Milton tries to talk about his eyesight. Remember, he was well and fine. He was a very good poet. He was a poet that was writing moral poems, like religious poems. Now one day he happens to, lose his sight. He could not see again, and that affected his writing. And writing to him was one of his consuming passions. I was inspired by that poem written by John Milton, and the poem is all about someone who loves writing, and all of a sudden he lost his sight because of natural stuff. And he was a very good writer, and he wrote that poem called When I Consider How My Life is Spent, talking about how he lost his eyesight and how he feels. But later in that poem, the same poet, when he made a lamentation, later he accepted that this is his fate, that God has different ways. Like there is no only one way we can serve God.
Poetry is more than art. It is activism, education, and preservation. In the Gambia, it lives on through the voices who dare to speak.